Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Salatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. Bismillah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. My name is Karim Sirajuddin. I am honored to be invited by About Islam to do this live session. We will specifically be discussing interfaith and multicultural marriages. And I've got a couple of questions that were submitted beforehand, which I'm going to take some time to do my best to respond to. And you're also welcome to leave some questions in the comments, and I will do my best to respond to those as well. First and foremost, all my answers today are going to be general advice. It is not specific or particular for any individual or anyone listening or anyone who submitted a question to take it as exactly what they should do. I advise everybody to consider their own context, their own situation, the consequences that they could face in their situation, and just remember that I'm giving general advice regarding these questions. Okay? So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Question number 1 that was submitted, it says, I am a Christian lady in a relationship with a Muslim man, planning to get married, but his parents are opposing to us and even threatening their son that if he will not stop having relations, they will forget that he is a family member and take his feet again in their home. He won't be allowed back in their home. The sister is asking, what should I do? I love him and I respect his family. Okay. And there's a second question that I also received, which I'm going to read and respond to both because they're very similar in their issue. Question number 2, Assalamu alaikum. I am a white revert seeking to marry a Pakistani lady. We both love each other and want to marry her, but her family said no because of the culture and the ethnicity. Islamically, this is wrong. So what options do we have? How can we move forward? Jazakallahu khair. All right. So both questions here asked by one female and one male. They're both in similar situations where they feel ready to marry somebody, but the families of both individuals are rejecting the prospect because of culture or an ethnicity, or at least that's what it tells us. So before I answer more practically some of these things, I'd like to just give an overview of some concepts and ideas that we should keep in mind regarding multicultural marriages and interfaith marriages, bi'idhnillah. So first of all, ladies and gentlemen, you know, it's more common for Muslims, or for anybody for that matter, to want to marry someone from the same culture. It makes logical sense. There's similar values, behaviors, customs, nuances, etiquettes, of course, and language. So we know that even food is something that brings families and people together, and we have similar recipes. This can be really important for certain families. Now, people may want to marry from the same culture because it's way more familiar and comfortable for them, and that's totally valid. There's nothing wrong with wanting to marry somebody who's from the same culture. It just has to be something that is conscious and a decision that is made, truly. Now, in a situation where you have intercultural marriages, these can be challenging and quite beautiful, just like marrying somebody from the same culture. It always has a set of unique gifts as well as hardships. Now, the question we have to ask ourselves is, why do people marry multiculturally or a different faith or a different culture if, generally speaking, marrying somebody from your culture is just a lot easier for some people? It's like we said, it's way more familiar, it's a lot more comfortable. Well, there's a couple of reasons, I think, why people marry outside of their culture. One reason could be the person that they felt most compatible with happens to be someone from a different culture, right? Or a same culture. And sometimes people are genuinely just interested in different cultures and ethnicities, and they like that novelty or that freshness. And so this is not uncommon, especially in our global society that's developing more and more these days. People are connecting and communicating with people all over the planet, and you're gonna, of course, meet a range of different ethnicities in your countries. And so this is definitely a very understandable reason why someone would marry outside of their culture. They just genuinely fell in love or feel compatible with somebody who isn't the same. Now, sometimes individuals experience negativity from their own culture. And, the two people who submitted these questions just, consider these points because it's general advice. But sometimes we marry individuals because we've had our own problems within our culture or our family. This may be related to stigma or trauma surrounding culture or family, and the individual wants to find something very different and unique from their situation, something refreshing, something that's outside their typical cultural structures. For example, if an Arab Muslim grew up and was frequently yelled at in Arabic, the very sound of the language might, act as a trigger for them, and they feel genuinely uncomfortable around it. And there are other stories like where people get abused or affected negatively by certain cultural customs that were unjust or double standards. And so sometimes people, based on their background experience, are naturally drawn to whatever is different from what they grew up in. Sometimes people marry outside of their culture as a way to escape their family, or as an act of rebellion, if you will, out of spite that they don't want to marry somebody from their culture. So, for example, if my parents told me every day that I have to marry an Iranian doctor my whole life, that's going to be something I'll probably be turned off by along the way, because we know how humans are. The more you tell them to do something over and over and over again, the less likely they'll want to do it, right? So sometimes people do this because they want to get out of these situations or do it out of rebellion. And in other cases, people marry multiculturally because genuinely there's a compatibility there. And these two questions, the one from the sister and the one from the brother, it seems like this is the case, that they want to marry these people because there's a genuine compatibility. However, the families are not open. So let's talk a little bit about when families object to multicultural marriages, all right? Now, in cases where the individual is told they cannot marry someone because of their culture, and the parent's personal preference is to stick with their own culture or ethnicity, we're consequently going to see different types of negative outcomes. And often that pain is a difficult thing to deal with, and sometimes we make it more about our culture rather than the religion. But it's a little tricky here because, as I said, Islamically it's valid for you to say, I want to marry somebody from my culture and ethnicity. That's a choice. And what makes it difficult here is if you're an adult and you want to marry someone outside of your culture, but your parents disapprove, okay? Now, it depends on, again, your situation, but if you're 25, 27, or 35 years old, you don't actually need your parents' permission to get married at that point, okay? You're an adult. It's really about looking for approval and harmony with your parents. And that's something that, we're going to explore a bit more. Now, in some situations, the parents are actually right, especially if the person wants to marry someone who has a very different understanding of priorities, or maybe even a different religion, or the culture is just so different. It's going to be very difficult to find that harmony and connection with the family. Now, in these situations, the parents really sometimes have their best interest for their children. Like, genuinely, the parents aren't trying to be, racist, or they're trying to, break your heart. Sometimes the parents are genuinely being practical, right? And again, if you're younger, like I'd say between ages 18 and 25, you may need a little more of that parental guidance, especially if you don't have much experience living outside of the home. Now, if you're older than that and have had experience or have been married before, then you're in a place where you're going to have to make your own decision regarding this. So in situations where the marriage would truly not be in the best interest of the individual, according to the parents, then the person has a couple of options. They have to consider, first and foremost, is marrying this person the pleasure or the beauty that I will gain? Is it more than the discomfort or pain I might cause with my family, right? And we also have to ask ourselves, when parents disapprove, there's different levels of intensity for that, right? So some parents might just be like, look, we're not happy about it, but if you're going to do it, you're going to do it. And, don't expect us to be super excited, because we're just not. But you can still marry the person. In other cases, it can get more intense, like we read in the question submitted. If you marry somebody outside, we're going to disown you, and you won't be a part of our family. I've even seen cases where, a mother, let's say, doesn't even go to the wedding out of spite. But again, that's considered very immature and, toxic behavior. So if your parents are the type who would do something like that, then you also have to ask yourself if they're the type of parents you really want to please and get their approval, because, respect, courtesy, loyalty, and good character always goes both ways. Even though there are elders and we have to honor our parents and listen to their advice, but we still have to also recognize that we're, individuals and adults, and we're also accountable for the choices that we make and what we plan to do with ourselves. So to go back to the initial two questions that I read at the beginning of our session here, I think both parties have to ask themselves, is it really just about the culture and the ethnicity? And if so, what are the main problems? So for example, I had a case once where the parents did make it a problem because the son wanted to marry a sister from outside of their culture. And the sister basically said, look, if the problem is the language, if the problem is the summer vacations and going back to your homeland, I'm willing to do all of that. I'm willing to learn the language. I'm willing to go visit your home country, learn the recipes. So the sister was trying to show that culture is not something we should, necessarily get in the way in her particular case. And she really genuinely wanted to learn. However, that wasn't good enough for these parents. They said, look, that's very nice of you, but it's just not going to fly for us. It's not enough. And sometimes that's the situation. Other situations, these issues can be solved, like learning the language or adapting more to certain customs. In situations where the people are, let's say, very religious and they want to marry someone who isn't religious, this is understandable too if the parents are against it. So sometimes we have to ask ourselves, is it more than just the culture and ethnicity? And are there other practical reasons that the parents may not be very comfortable with this? Now, remember, socioeconomic class, educational levels, these all play a role in compatibility with a family and with a spouse as well. So we have to ask ourselves, number one, is it simply personal preferences for example, the person is not a specific race, ethnicity, or they pick at physical features like, oh, they're not tall enough. These things are items that should be addressed. Some can be solved, so to speak, and explored, while others, it's like you can't really change if somebody is not tall enough or fair-skinned enough. The second thing is, are these concerns based on religious values? So is it because the person does not have a similar worldview, or is it because they are a different religion or a different sect, and so on and so forth? So these things must be explored. And lastly, is it based on maybe specific things that the parents observe in the individual, right? That maybe they don't have great character, they didn't have a good experience when they met them, and so on and so forth. Now, in cases where the parents never met the person, it is difficult to know what is really going on. And I advise, that if you can, try to have your parents at least meet the people you're interested in getting married to, and say, look, give them a chance. If you really believe after giving them some chances that it's really not a good fit, we can talk about it, but you can't shut it down before you even give the person an opportunity. So a couple of tips that I would offer in this situation is, like I said, one, meeting with the family to discuss the prospect of marriage and try to make the case why it is a good fit from your perspective, if you truly feel it's compatible. If the parents aren't open to speaking with you, then maybe you can draw on other family members or imams or siblings that could try to, open up that conversation. The second tip I would offer is, if the parents are unwilling to have that conversation and you've tried everything you could to explain to them or show them that this is what you want, now you as an adult have to decide something. You have to decide if the parents' approval is based on legitimate, valid reasons that you accept. If they're not, and you still want to marry this individual, then you have to ask yourself, is marrying this sister or this brother going to give me, more benefit than the difficulties that I will face with my parents in the future, right? So in other words, the joy or gain I'm going to get from marrying this person, is it heavier on the scale than the, struggle and challenges I'm going to have with my family, right? So that's something you really have to think about as an adult, because that is a sacrifice you're going to make. Number three is, it's also going to hurt if you marry the person without your parents' approval. There's going to be stress on the marriage. There probably will be distance from the parents. Sometimes, from my experience, working with cases like this, sometimes, believe it or not, the parents actually come around. At first they're very resistant. They reject it. They say, I don't want to talk to you. You're not a part of the family. But sometimes after a year, 2, 3 goes by, they start to recognize their own, their own mistake, that why would we disown our daughter or our son just because they married someone who isn't our culture, especially if the person you want to marry is a good person, a good Muslim or a good Muslima, or has good values as a person. Sometimes the parents actually come around and learn to accept it. Because remember, people fear and resist what they don't understand and what's unfamiliar. This is going to be the natural response for most people. Something different and foreign is going to be challenging. But once they get used to it or accustomed to the idea after a year, 2 or 3, it might be easier for them to come around and accept your situation and the marriage that you chose. On the other hand, sometimes parents don't come around. They really ignore you and don't come to the wedding and don't want to talk to you and don't care if you brought them a grandchild. This happens too. And you each have to consider this seriously, because these are part of the consequences that you will have to bear if you move ahead with your choice without your parents' approval or preference. Now, you also have to remember that it's going to hurt either way. It's going to hurt to end the relationship as well, and it's also going to hurt and cause pain to your family or parents if you decide to marry someone that they're not in approval of. So you also have to consider, which pain is heavier on your decision scale. Breaking your fiance's heart or your parents' heart, if that's the case. And whatever decision is made, make sure you weigh the pros and cons of each choice first. So I'd recommend making a table, pros and cons of marrying this person, pros and cons of not marrying this person, and how it's going to make my family happy, and really, go through that and give it some serious thought, because ultimately you have to make a decision and be practical. You can talk about Islam all day long, but if your parents or family don't care, or that's not really going to impact them, you still have to make a practical decision. So that's my response to those two questions. And I'm just going to take a quick look here to see if we've got any other questions come in. All right. So another question I received was, Salam, I have a Arab husband, and we live in the West. He doesn't like it here. He hates his job. He hates where he lives. He does not feel he is a man, and he doesn't feel like he's the husband or the head of the family or the decision maker. This affects me. This is a sister talking. This affects me in our marriage. I feel he has become very impatient with me, and for a year we cannot communicate normally. I feel he misunderstands me and talks to me in a belittling way. He feels I am arrogant and does not look up to him. He wants more intimacy. He wants children. I have problems or anxieties in regards to both. And he has a list in which I should change, but he hardly accepts that he needs to change in things. We are at the edge of divorce, and he does not want to go to marriage counseling. What shall I do? Where is the line when you say you will just give up and you have no more hope and patience? All right. I'm sorry to hear all that, sister. It sounds like you're in a tough place. So one thing I always tell people is never marry somebody for their potential. And what I mean by that is many times we marry someone hoping that they will change in fundamental ways to fit our, compatibility better. That's not fair, it's not truthful, and it's not honest. Always marry somebody for their core traits. And what I mean by that is, we all know that if you have a friend that you've known for a long time, there are certain things about them that will always be part of their character, right? They usually don't fundamentally change completely over time. What happens is we become more of who we already are over time. We just become refined selves or refined versions of ourselves from who we actually are. That's usually the case, okay? Potential qualities are things that, they're not natural in me, but there's some things I can adjust to, right? So for example, if I am a very social person by nature, that's a core quality. If I want to marry a person who's very, very quiet and introverted, I shouldn't marry an extrovert and assume that I can change them completely, right? That's ridiculous. You can't fundamentally change people like that. We know how hard it is to change ourselves. So what about changing another human being, right? So this is important to keep in mind, and to also keep in mind before and during marriage. There are certain core qualities in people that can only become refined qualities, right? So they can improve, become better. Yes, absolutely. But you can't expect fundamental core qualities of an individual to just change because you want them to or you hope they can. So if your husband believes that certain core qualities of who you are, sister, is going to fundamentally change somehow, that's probably not going to happen. And what's probably going to happen is you two will become more of who you already are. Now, again, don't confuse this with Karim is saying you can't change and evolve as a person. No, you can. But I'm telling you, there's a difference between refining core qualities and, growing in potential qualities. That's what I am establishing here. But you can't take someone's 10 set core qualities, throw them out the window, and then replace them with new ones, right? That doesn't happen. And we know this. That's why some marriages don't end up working out, because people are fundamentally different and they're not compatible. Now, in this situation, sister, where you feel like your husband is very resentful and upset with his situation, he wants you to make all these changes, but he doesn't want to make changes, and he's not open to marriage counseling, this is a very tough thing. It's also a very unrealistic pathway that you guys have established if you really want to improve your marriage. Look, bottom line is this. If two people are ready to put in sincere effort to improve their marriage, inshallah, success will be inevitable if you really try and your core qualities are in harmony. Sometimes people really try, and it doesn't matter how hard they work, it's just not going to work out. And I always say, if the marriage seems like too much hard work, it's not working. Good marriages are not very hard. Yes, you have challenges. Yes, you have conflicts from time to time, but 70, 80% of the time, it's smooth and peaceful. That's a good marriage. It's not the other way around. You can't have only 20% good times and 80% horrible times and assume, oh, we just have to, work on the marriage. Sometimes it's not that case. Sometimes it's a matter of incompatibility. But the only way to truly know that is you've got to put in the work. You've got to do that marriage counseling. You've got to get that extra support. And if after 6 to 12 months you see hardly any progress, then it's probably a sign that you two weren't a good match in the first place. I like to call it's like peanut butter and fish. No matter how many ways you try to create a delicious recipe with peanut butter and fish, it's just not going to work. It doesn't matter how many ways you season it and cook it and this and that. Some ingredients just don't go well together. And we have to accept this, right? It's not the end of the world if you realize this person isn't a good fit for me, okay? And that's the other problem is in our community, we are obsessed with this idea of a soulmate and one person forever, and this is all nonsense, all right? Umar ibn al-Khattab was married 6 times, and he was better than all of us on Facebook today. So what does that say about him? That he wasn't a good person? Or that marriage is something that you can end and begin and try with different people as needs be, right? It's a serious thing, but it's not this, that one time you do it, that's it, and you have to stay stuck in a marriage for the rest of your life just because of the stigma of divorce. This is, a different form of being unhealthy, okay? So if you can't, go to marriage counseling together, sister, with your husband and truly try to have sincere effort and work on this, then, you have to be honest with yourself and ask, is this something I'm willing to live with much longer? Especially if he's coming from a place of, I'm not going to change, you have to change, and I'm not willing to work on anything. You're the one that has to accommodate me. That's not going to work. You can't only withdraw money from a bank account and expect you're going to have savings. If you only withdraw, then you'll be depleted and in debt. If you withdraw and deposit money, then you have more stability. So think about it like that, the love account. Both of you have to deposit into the love accounts that you each have in your hearts. You can't have one person just withdrawing and expecting the other to keep, depositing. So that's my advice, that, you have to give it an honest try. And after some time, if you don't see sincere efforts or interest, then you may need to consider another prospect.